What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, I'm going to talk about breaking the template. Who are the highest owned players right now? Are they worth going for? And if not, who should you be looking at instead? If you enjoyed the video, give it a like and hit that subscribe button. And before we jump into all that, I want to talk to you about Sleeper. So I'm happy to say that I've partnered with Sleeper for the 2024-25 season. Sleeper is a fantasy football app that's going to let you compete with your friends and test your football knowledge absolutely free. As well as having a great Premier League fantasy draft experience with tons of customization, they've also got their Premier League pick'em game, but all you have to do is simply choose who's going to win or draw each game every game week. You can set up leagues with your friends if you want. I've set up a Let's Talk FPL one, which you can join using the link in the description below to see if you can beat me. It is free to join, as I've said, and there's $3,000 worth of prizes on offer this season. So I've got the Sleeper app on my phone. I'm going to show you just how quick and easy it is to submit your picks every week. So first game is Man United versus Fulham. You know where I'm going. I'm going for a Man United win. Then it's Liverpool against Ipswich for me and Arsenal against Wolves. Everton versus Brighton. It's hard to call, so I'm just going to go for a draw. Forest to beat Bournemouth, especially with Bournemouth not having Solanke now. Newcastle to take the win against Southampton. I think that's a fairly obvious one. West Ham Villa is tough. Villa great last year. West Ham have made some great signings. I'm going to go for a draw there. Brentford to beat Palace, despite me having Palace players in my squad currently. Man City to beat Chelsea, almost certainly. And then Leicester Spurs, I think I'm going to go for a Spurs win as well. That is it. That's all you have to do every single week. And like I said, lots of prizes on offer, completely free to play. You can set up leagues with your friends. You might as well try it out. Links in the description below. So let's start with the goalkeepers and defenders. And remember that these are the highest owned players in each position. It's not necessarily a squad of 15 players that you're going to be able to pick with the budget you have. But it's good to talk about why they're high owned and who you might want to go for instead if you want to bet against some of these kind of more template picks. So David Raya is the most owned goalkeeper, 23.6%. Maybe I'm misremembering. I am getting quite old, but generally in seasons gone past, 4.5 and 5 million goalkeepers going into game week 1 are much more popular. I think it just goes to show how much people rate the Arsenal defence. They were so good last year, and there's not really anything to say that they can't continue that this year. The main 11 is going to be almost identical. Arteta's got them playing really well. They control games. They will keep a lot of clean sheets again. So I think he's a solid pick, especially as a long-term one. And also, it's probably the cheapest, safest way into that Arsenal defence. Gabriel, Saliba, Ben White, all 6 million plus. My gut instinct is that a 4.5 or 5 million goalkeeper and then spending that money elsewhere will end up working out better. But I can't sit here and tell you that Raya is a bad pick because he's just not. So if you've got the budget, you're happy with the rest of your squad, you should go for him. Matt Turner on the bench, 22.2%. I've spoken about him before. He's a 4 million goalkeeper for Nottingham Forest. He's not going to play. And in the past, we've seen when cheap players like this are super high owned, they do tend to drop in price quite quickly. And some people have said to me that won't happen, but why take the risk? You're not gaining anything by having Turner. He's probably third choice at Nottingham Forest, and they'll probably buy another goalkeeper as well. So I would just pick a 4 million with much lower ownership if you can. In terms of other goalkeeper options, at 5.5, you've also got Alisson for Liverpool. Now, Liverpool's defence is not as good as Arsenal, but their opening fixtures are excellent. So if you're going on a short-term strategy like Game Week 4, Game Week 4 or Game Week 6 wildcard, which some people are looking at, maybe you could bet against David Raya and go for Liverpool instead. Pickford was excellent last year, 4 points per match, actually beat Alisson, not far behind Raya either. And I think the Everton defence will still be pretty decent this year, and the fixtures are quite good, both short and long term. And obviously you saved the 0.5 million there. Nick Pope at 5.8% ownership, he interests me a little bit. I do think we'll see an improvement in Newcastle this year. Right, they've got a few players back. They're hopefully going to make the signing of Gay as well. Livramento, if Trippier goes, is fine. Lewis Hall's playing a lot of left back. We'll talk about him in a minute. I just don't know if he's better than Pickford. Like the Newcastle defensive numbers last year weren't great, but they did have a lot of injuries. I appreciate that Botman is still out, but they are going to get a bunch of players back. I just think we should expect improvement from Newcastle, but I'm not sure it's enough for me to go for Pope over Pickford. But if you're interested in him, I think he's a good option. And then for the 4.5s that are definitely going to play and aren't from newly promoted sides, you're probably looking at Flecken, Henderson and Areola. At the time of recording, Brentford have literally just played a pre-season game yesterday and conceded 4. So all of a sudden, Flecken doesn't look so good. But you can pair him with Valdemarson and have an 8.5 million goalkeeper combination from Brentford. So if something happens to Flecken or he gets dropped because he's rubbish, you've got the backup on the bench. Henderson at Palace, though, might be the one. Palace defensive numbers were good last year. Even if they lose Gay, I still think they'll be okay. And it looks like Johnston might leave. So Henderson is going to be first choice unless they sign someone else. So that's goalkeepers. With the defenders, Saliba, again, Arsenal very popular, 39.5%. I'm coming round to the idea that if I go for an Arsenal defender, I'm quite tempted by Gabriel because I think he will start the season. I think long term there is maybe a bit of rotation concern there just because Arteta's got more options than last year. But I think he'll start and his goal threat is higher. So Saliba is not a bad option, but I do think 3 of the first 5 fixtures for Arsenal are difficult for clean sheets. And Saliba doesn't have a massive amount of goal threat. He can go and get you a goal, but if Arsenal are going to score from a set piece, I would bet on it being like a Declan Rice or a Gabriel instead. Vardiol, annoyingly, I'm having to record this before the Community Shield is played, so I'm not quite sure in what role he's going to play for Man City. If it's a case of him being in the back 3 in build-up and he's not getting down the left and he's not almost playing like a winger, I'm a little bit less interested in him, but I am pretty sure he's going to start the season in that 11 for Man City. It's just a case of how long will that last. But the fact they've got Ipswich at home in Game Week 2 is quite a big pull, and he was quite attacking last year. But I think we need to see him play in that attacking role again. Because if he doesn't, look, Man City is a really good defence, but part of the reason you go for Vardiol is for that attacking output. And if it's not there, I'm definitely less keen on him, especially when longer term he will be a minutes considered. Even if he starts the first 4 games, I'm telling you now from owning Man City players in the past, you'll still be thinking every week, will he start? Will he start? It's just one of those things with a lot of City players. But again, 32.8% ownership, decent enough pick. Pedro Porro is getting more and more popular. 29.1% current ownership. Extremely attacking. Spurs defence not great, but they also had a lot of injuries last year, a bit like Newcastle. And so I think we should expect to see some improvement from them. And it looks like they're going to sign Solanke as well. That deal will probably be done and completed by the time you watch this video. I think that will also help their defence because he's very good at pressing from the front and obviously helping Spurs win the ball back. And that is something they try and do quite a lot. They're quite an aggressive team. So I would expect Spurs to improve, not to the point where they're like an Arsenal or Man City defence, like nowhere near, in fact. But I'm not sure they'll be as bad as they were last year. And Porro is so attacking, and he's nailed on as well, that I like him as a pick, especially if you can cover those fixtures which aren't quite so good for clean sheets. And then on the bench, you've got Anderson and Trent Alexander-Arnold. I really like Trent. Let's see if he starts in Liverpool's final pre-season game because he hasn't had any pre-season minutes yet. But I think he was away with England, but he didn't play, right? Or sorry, he did, but he didn't play a huge role in that team. He wasn't playing every single game like a Saka or a Kane, etc. So I think Trent will probably be fine to start the season. I think 7 million is a good price. I'm expecting Liverpool to do fine under Slot. Not guaranteed, but I think they will be fine. And also the fixtures are pretty good. So I really like Trent as a pick. And then Anderson, similar ownership to Trent. I think Crystal Palace defence, the underlying numbers last year were decent. And look, if you lose someone like Gay, it is a big blow to your defensive prospects. But I don't know if it's such a big blow that we should then ignore Crystal Palace completely. Like someone else will come in. And remember, it's not just the back 4, it's the system overall. I've just mentioned with Spurs, like Solanke could help improve them defensively, as stupid as that sounds. That's just how the game is these days, right? It's not just about how the back 4 performs, it's about everyone else in front. How well do you control the ball, etc. So I think under Glasner, Palace are onto a good thing. And if Gay goes, I don't think it would stop me necessarily owning a Crystal Palace defensive option, and Anderson's goal threat is pretty decent. In terms of other defender options, like I've just mentioned, Gabriel instead of Saliba, especially if you're on a short-term strategy, like being aggressive, early wild card, I like the idea of just going for Gabriel for that extra goal threat and also lower ownership. He's only 11.6. Van Dijk, if you want a safe option into the Liverpool defence at 6 million as well. Lewis Hall keeps starting at left-back for Newcastle. Now, it's difficult to know from their final pre-season games because they're playing 2 games back, like in 2 days, basically. So the team will be split up a little bit, but lots of Newcastle fans think that Lewis Hall will start the season. My only concern about going for him is I don't think the fixtures are that good defensively early on. But they're not, like Southampton at home is fine, but then it's Bournemouth away, although they will probably be without Solanke now. Spurs at home, Wolves away, Fulham away, Man City home, Everton away, Brighton at home, Chelsea away, Arsenal at home. All their good games are away from home. I've said that before. And long term, you just don't know if Lewis Hall is going to keep his place. If you think his minutes are going to be very good long term and he's now Newcastle's first choice left back, I think he's a great option. He's so good from an attacking sense. His delivery is brilliant. He's only 1.6% ownership, but there is massive risk with that pick. If you want to stick to Palace but go for a more attacking option, you've got Munoz at 5 million. Robinson at Fulham, not great defensive numbers last year, but he is fairly attacking. They've got good fixtures early on as well, especially after game week 1. And then Van de Ven at Spurs. If you want to cover that defence but not go for Porro, then Van de Ven's obviously a million less. Not as attacking, but also easier to bench for some of those more difficult fixtures. So in midfield, Cole Palmer is the highest owned player at 45.9%, which isn't that surprising considering he got 244 points last year. Salah, probably the most consistent FPL option ever, 211 points plus every season he's been at Liverpool, is 35.8%. Then it's Eze at 33.2, Anthony Gordon at 33, and then on the bench is Phil Foden at 25.8% ownership. So he is still pretty popular. I'll start with him. I wouldn't pick him for game week 1. Again, I've not seen the Community Shield at the time of recording, but Pep Guardiola has had his press conference for that, and he said that Foden, Walker, Rodri, the players that got back late, are not going to feature at all. They're probably not even going to be in the squad for Man City. So going into game week 1, Foden will have had no pre-season minutes whatsoever. Now, I don't think that keeps him out of the team for a long time, but it seems very unlikely that he's going to start in game week 1. Pep's almost certainly going to choose players, that have had at least a bit of pre-season. He may well start against Ipswich in game week 2, but there's not a guarantee. It'll probably depend on how many minutes he gets against Chelsea, but also how the other players play that get given their chance in the Community Shield. So I just don't think it's worth taking a risk for Foden. If you were certain, or you could guarantee that he was going to start against Ipswich, then you could have him in your squad, put him on the bench and just play someone else for game week 1. But I'm just not sure. I just don't think it's worth the risk. Like at 9.5 million, that's a fair price for Foden, but it's not like he's cheap. There's plenty of other players that are going to play for less money or even slightly more, which offer just as many kind of routes to points. So for me right now, unless we hear something different from Pep or he's got no choice but to play him, I think Foden's an ignore. Anthony Gordon hasn't had a huge amount of pre-season minutes either. He started the most recent game for Newcastle. I think he got 45 minutes, went off at halftime, did score as well. I think he probably will play because although he hasn't had a huge amount of game time, he also didn't play that much for England. I know he was away, but he barely got minutes whatsoever, right? It was I think one cameo and that was about it. So I think he'll be fine. Southampton at home is a good fixture. He is definitely in Newcastle's best 11. And he is relied upon quite a lot for Eddie Howe, right? He got a lot of minutes last season. So I think he is a good option at 7.5. Doesn't offer anything in terms of, penalties. He might take the odd set piece here or there. But I think for 7.5, you're getting a player that is always going to start when he's fit. And from an attacking point of view, I think Newcastle's fixtures are fine. I will say, though, I think a lot of people during pre-season have been building 3-5-2 squads with Gordon. I think there is a case now to be made to go 3-4-3, and instead of having a 7.5 million midfielder, have a forward like Solanke, maybe Darwin if you want to take that risk. Tony might stay at Brentford now. There is that route to set your squad up as well. We'll talk about the forwards in a minute. I've had Eze in every single one of my drafts. I think he's a really good pick. The only thing that would now put me off is speculation that he might not start game week 1 because, again, a lack of pre-season minutes because he was away with England, but he didn't play a huge amount. Or if transfer speculation kicks back up, because it was touted earlier on that he might go, right? And obviously Man City are one of those teams that was reported were interested in him. And the thing with Man City is they've sold Alvarez for a lot of money. They suddenly have money they can spend. It might be that they go in for Eze. I'm not sure whether Spurs will, but there is that slight, I guess, worry. And if Eze goes to either of those teams, he becomes a worse FPL option. He'll lose penalties. His minutes won't be guaranteed. And so I'd probably look to not have him. But as it stands at the time of recording, that transfer speculation seems to have died down a bit. Doesn't mean it can't come back again. But I think if he's at Palace, he's a solid option. With or without Elise, with or without Mateta, etc. I know Elise's gone, but I think he just offers so much from an FPL point of view. And he's only 7 million. Salah, we've discussed a lot during pre-season. I think he's great. I don't think there's going to be a drop-off under Slot. I don't think Salah is getting to the point now where, because of his age, there's going to be a massive decline. The numbers he put up last year, expected goals, expected assists, incredible. And the returns were pretty decent as well. I mean, 211 points is still very good, even if it's his worst season at Liverpool. And the opening fixtures are brilliant. So if you can fit him in, great. For me, it's still one of Salah or Haaland. I think you can build a team with both, but I'm not particularly keen on the sacrifices, but I've got nothing bad to say against Salah. If you want him, you absolutely should. And then Cole Palmer, I don't see myself starting with him this season, right? And it's not that I've got the opinion that he's a one-season wonder and he can't replicate what he did last year. And by the way, he doesn't have to hit 244 to justify that price, right? We don't necessarily own players all season. When Chelsea have got good fixtures, he will be a good option. It wasn't a flash in the pan. The underlying numbers are good. And he's just a good player, right? I think we've seen that for the brief time he's played for England as well. So I like him. I just think for game week 1, like he's 10.5 million as well. So he's 0.5 more than both Saka and Son. And Son's had a full pre-season. And the fixtures at the start for Spurs aren't that bad. So straight away I'm thinking I just go for the 0.5 million less option and pick someone that has had a pre-season. Also with Chelsea, and look, you've got to be careful about creating narratives. But you look at them in pre-season, they got such a bloated squad. I think if you ask most Chelsea fans how they're going to set up and who's going to be in that first 11 most weeks, I'm not sure they could tell you. Like some of the picks, of course, you know, right? But the full 11, I don't know. Maresca's already coming out in pre-season. I wouldn't say he's making excuses, but there's already talk about how the defensive high line is too high and he wants it to drop back. He's not really sure why it's happening. I don't know. The noise coming out of Chelsea just doesn't sound great. And it doesn't mean I think they will go and play bad. And I don't think that their attacking options in particular are bad. Right? I've got Nkunku in my own team. But to spend 10.5 on Palmer when I can go and get Son for 10, or even Saka for 10 as well, like Arsenal's fixtures are pretty good. Saka's also on penalties. There's something about Palmer that tells me just don't go for him in game week 1. And it's not because I think he's bad. I'm not sure about spending that extra little bit of money. And money will get tight. As you get closer to game week 1, you'll be trying to eke all those 0.5s out of different positions just to bolster the rest of your squad. It does make a difference. I just don't think... I think I'll leave it on this with Palmer. I think he's a really good option. I just don't necessarily think he's better than Saka or Son. I just don't think he's worth paying that money for. Even the Man City fixture doesn't really worry me that much because the fixtures afterwards are good. I just don't see it. I don't think his ownership should be that high. But feel free to disagree and put him in your squad. I'm often wrong. In terms of other midfielders, I've mentioned Saka or Son. I won't go into that anymore. Obviously, with Saka, I guess you've got to be sure he's going to start game week 1. It might be that Arsenal go without him against Wolves and then bring him in for game week 2. So that's a worry. But that's not going to be a worry with Son. In Nkunku, I've just mentioned Chelsea, but I think for 6.5, he's much more kind of, I would say worth the... I don't think Palmer's a risk. That's a bad way to phrase it. But there's less of your budget being spent with Nkunku, right? And he is definitely one of those players that could outscore that price tag. So I really like him. Bruno Fernandes is not someone being talked about a huge amount, but he is fairly consistent, 4.7 points per match. And obviously last year, compared him to Saka, they were the same price, right? So it was a no-brainer to pretty much always pick Saka. There's a big difference now, right? And I'm not saying you should drop Saka and get Fernandes, but if you've got that kind of budget to spend, he does offer you kind of a hassle-free FPL pick, a bit like Odegaard as well, where you know they're always going to play, and Fernandes has those penalties as well. So I wouldn't completely rule him out, especially if you're someone that, with the new rules about wanting to roll transfers, wants to try that strategy where they do bank like 3 or 4 early on. Having players like Fernandes you don't need to worry about, it's fine, and the fixtures are good. So I don't think he's a terrible pick. In Burma at 7 million, if you don't want to go for Eze, I would have put Rashford on this graphic, but I don't think I could have had Fernandes and Rashford. Let's see how Rashford plays in the Community Shield, whether he's looking sharp, fit, etc. Again, I do like Manchester United's opening fixtures, but also when I step back, I just look at that team, and I don't think it's got any better from last season. So there is part of me that's just massively worried about how they'll perform. But in Burma at 7... it doesn't look like Tony's going to leave, so he probably won't get penalties, but it doesn't mean he can't return. And a couple of the early fixtures aren't bad at all. Or you can just drop down to 5.5 million if you don't want 6.5s like Smith Rowe. Brereton Diaz is pretty good. Minter at Brighton, if you want to take a bit of a punt as well. There's lots of 5.5 options, and that lets you spend more money elsewhere too. And then up front, you've got Isak at 55.2%, Watkins at 48%, and Haaland at 43.4%. With Isak in particular, I'm sure if you took a sample of drafts from people watching this video or content creators in general, he'd probably be at 90% plus ownership. He is super popular. And I've said this before, in my videos, even if it's not my opinion, I will try and provide a counterpoint or play devil's advocate. I just don't have anything bad to say against Isak. He is just a fantastic pick. 8.5, definitely going to take penalties, more goals than Watkins last year. Opening fixtures for an attacker for Newcastle were good. Just put him in. He's really, really good. Watkins, he's a good pick too. I think it's a bit like Cole Palmer. I don't think 48% ownership is necessarily warranted, if that makes sense. Like, he's a good pick. Is he that good? That's what my thinking is with him. And look, he got 19 goals last year. He can probably get close to that, if not match it. Maybe even go slightly above this year in that Aston Villa team. But he also got 18 assists. So expectations should be set that his points total will probably be lower this year. Doesn't mean he's not worth 9 million. It's just setting those expectations. I also think, and again, you've got to be careful about narratives you're creating. If you disagree, you should absolutely put him in. The first two games, West Ham away, Arsenal at home. Now, defensively, last year, West Ham weren't great, but they're making some good signings. And I just think they're going to be better defensively this year. And then you run into the best defence in the league in Game Week 2, albeit at home. And Aston Villa gave them really good games last year, so they can score in that game, but it's not an ideal fixture. And look, you can say this about anyone, but if he does blank against West Ham away and other forwards are doing really well, I wonder if we'll see sales pretty quickly with that Arsenal fixture. Because although you can look at it and say, well, after that, it's Leicester, Everton, Wolves, Ipswich, good fixture run, keep him. Not everyone thinks like that. If he blanks in that first game and lots of other forwards smash it, and then you see Arsenal, people will sell him. So that's my only slight worry. But long term, Aston Villa's fixture is really good. We just don't know how they're going to be around Champions League. Like, Watkins has been a 90-minute man pretty much, and he will continue to start. I've got no concerns about that whatsoever. But around Champions League, will he get subbed a little bit early if the game's comfortable and stuff like that? Maybe. So that's the only uncertainty, is how will Villa handle being in the Champions League and being in the league. It didn't work that well for Newcastle last year, for example. So I know I sound pretty down on Watkins as a pick. I do think he's good. Like, if I saw him in someone's team, I wouldn't say they have to take him out. I just don't know if he warrants 48% ownership. But again, I could be wrong. I often am. And then Haaland is just good, right? Even for 15 million. Captaincy is such a big factor. Ipswich at home in Game Week 2. Personally, again, I think Haaland and Salah can be put into the same squad and work. I think it's better just to have one. The squads with Salah look better, but then you don't have Haaland. And I think, honestly, in FPL, I've seen it in the past before. There'll be a set of people that will go without Haaland, and they'll be able to cope with whatever he does in Game Week 1. They won't panic and bring him in for Game Week 2, and that's probably the right way to play it, right? Because we know Haaland can score goals. If you're not putting him in because you think he's going to do bad, then that's probably the wrong way to play. But there will be a ton of people that prefer the squad with Salah, and if Haaland does really well Game Week 1, they'll panic. And they'll wild card or they'll use hits and stuff like that. If that's you, just put him in right now. Honestly, you'll find it easier to manage the start of the season. But just quickly on Haaland, I'm not even sure it's necessarily just the Ipswich fixture. Like, I'm not saying that Chelsea away is easy, right? It's absolutely not. But defensively, and again, pre-season you probably shouldn't put too much emphasis on. But it's not great. It's not sounding great either. Like, Man City will get chances. Like, if you want me to provide a counterpoint to not going for Haaland, like Foden missing potentially at the start, Rodri as well, will Man City be the same? Possibly not. They've got so many good players there, and they're so well drilled in how to play. I just can't see how Haaland won't get chances the first couple of games. In terms of other options, Solanke going to Spurs, not confirmed at the time of recording, but it will be very soon. I think he probably becomes a slightly better option than at Bournemouth, but not by as much as people will expect, because he's not guaranteed to keep to keep penalties. I think Son will actually keep them, and Solanke will be second. and his minutes aren't guaranteed. Like, Richarlison's not going apparently. He's staying at Spurs. It might be they sell him over the next couple of weeks if a good offer comes in, but he's going to be there, so he can take minutes off Solanke as well. And it's not a case that Solanke won't start, because I think he will absolutely be first choice. But Richarlison could come on 70, 75 minutes, whereas before you had Solanke for the whole game, and now he might not have penalties. I understand he only scored a couple last year, so it's not a big factor in the amount of goals he scored, and he will get more chances at Spurs, but I don't think he suddenly becomes a massively better option. But with the fixture they've got to start the season, the fact he's only 7.5, I feel like I'd rather have him in than not, essentially. And that's why I like him over like a Gordon in a 3-4-3. And any concerns about him not starting, Postecoglou basically came out and said Van der Ven only joined just before the first game he played. He hit the ground running. Basically, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but he said they're buying Solanke. Well, he didn't mention his name, but they're buying him because he fits how they want to play, and therefore he can go straight in and play. So I'm pretty sure he's going to start Gameweek 1, even if he doesn't get 90 minutes. Tony probably going to stay at Brentford now, you would imagine, not guaranteed, but the fixtures still aren't great to start the season. Darwin Núñez, if you are confident about his minutes, I think he's probably the best 7.5. Like, if you told me that Solanke and Darwin are going to start the first 6 matches, I'd probably go for Darwin. But because of the risk there, I'd rather go for Solanke. Havertz I'm not that interested in, because I think Jesus might get minutes at number 9, and that would impact Havertz's output. Not that it would make him a bad FPL option, but I'm not sure he's worth paying more than Solanke. And also, he's only 0.5 million less than Isak. There's only 3 forward spots. I don't like Havertz as a pick, if I'm honest. Munir's good at 6 million. Chris Wood as well. Should start the season, but Awani might come in at some point. And then you've got 5.5 million options. João Pedro, if he looks like he's going to start the season. Adam Armstrong at Southampton takes penalties as well. So that is the current template. Out of all those players, the ones that I will probably bet against is Raya and Saliba. And I might go for an Arsenal defender, but it'll probably be Gabriel and take that risk about starts long term. Vardiol, maybe if he's attacking. Cole Palmer, I think I'm definitely paying 0.5 less and going Son or Saka. Haaland and Salah, I'm undecided. I'm pretty sure I'm going to start without Watkins. I want Eze. I'm probably going to start without Anthony Gordon, even though he's a good option. Let me know what you think about those players in the comments below. If you haven't checked out Sleeper already, make sure you do. Link in the description below to get the app downloaded and join my league. Like I said, completely free to play, very quick to play the pick'em game as well, and prizes on offer. So, I mean, there's not really anything bad to say about that. It's a bit like Isak, right? It's just worth going for. Hit a like, subscribe, rate 5 stars on podcast, and I'll catch you again tomorrow.